The Joe Rogan Experience.
But we kept those relationships in order to run this pro-democracy regime change thing. So in 1948, when we established the secrecy doctrine that we now live under, and all these NGOs work under this cover effectively because of their sponsoring organizations, USAID or CIA or state. And he called it the inauguration of organized political warfare. And what he said is, we need to create a covert apparatus to hide what we do from the rest of the world, to do secret political warfare on the low. And the problem is the American people are not going to like this. The American people do not understand the intricacies of international relations. They think there's always an easy political cure-all, and they do not understand. They think there's a fundamental difference between peace and war. And what he proposed is, and this is just 2 months before this would formally be given to the CIA to do. But at the time, what he said was this worked gangbusters in Italy. We need to replicate this everywhere. We need to create a capacity to do black propaganda, to do economic sabotage, demolition. There's a whole list of what's authorized under NSC 10-2. And what he says is, the American people are not necessarily going to like this, and we're going to need to effectively hide what we do from them, because if they find out, then the rest of the world finds out. If we're trying to run an operation in Eurasia and we report this in U.S. News, well, then any person in Eurasia who reads U.S. News now knows about it. And so that was authorized at the time with simultaneous with the Smith-Mundt Act, which are you familiar with the Smith-Mundt Act?
Is that the 2011, 2012 thing where Obama allowed people to use propaganda against United States citizens?
Yeah, that was what was done then under Obama was the effective repeal of it. It was called the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. But the modernization got rid of the whole purpose of it, the firewall, because at the time the media and media control was seen as the linchpin crux of winning the Cold War, piping in pro-U.S. Media influence because everything moved after World War II from kinetic warfare and military occupation. We used to militarily occupy the Philippines, for example, after we won the Spanish-American War. But that was banned under international law, territorial acquisition by military force in 1948. So we had to win elections, and we had to influence the passage of laws in foreign countries by having an apparatus inside those countries that influenced the hearts and minds of people, which influenced who they voted for, which then determined the government. So you had to move towards political vassalage rather than military occupation. And what the Smith-Mundt Act did is, simultaneous with the creation of this in 1948, Congress recognized the Frankensteinian monster they were creating by authorizing a covert, permanent Department of Dirty Tricks, and this is their phrase, not mine, to do this cloak and dagger, to infiltrate and co-opt the universities, the unions, the media, the politicians, the judges, the whole swarm army. What I have been calling for a long time the USAID Truman Show, because it's these people in these foreign countries have no idea how many of the things they interact with that are effectively a movie set being constructed by the U.S. State Department and its sister influence orgs. But the point that I'm getting at here is the Smith-Mundt Act in 1948 said, okay, you guys can do this. State Department can do this. CIA can do this. USAID, when it came along 13 years later, could do this. But so there was a guy named Frank Wisner who was known as one of the godfather figures of the CIA. He's known for creating what was called the Wisner's Wurlitzer, which was it's like a church organ, and that he would brag that he could play the international media like a symphony to make any media narrative go viral in any country on earth, because of the suite of CIA proprietary media functions and its distribution network, especially when the U.S. had first mover advantage in radio and print. It's basically the U.S. and U.K. were the only games in town, really, in having robust radio, film, TV, and print media. So the Smith-Mundt said, okay, you can do that abroad. You can plant fake news stories in France. You can have propaganda blare into Africa or Western Europe or Central Asia, but that can't come home. You can't psyop our own people with your propaganda organ abroad, because the whole point of authorizing this is that we get cheaper gas, we get import-export markets, we get a high standard of living, because if a foreign government doesn't want to give up its resources or allow a U.S. military base or allow joint partnerships or exports of goods or U.S. multinational corporations to operate there, then the American people suffer economically. So it was always designed to say, listen, you can do this dirty stuff abroad, but it can't come home. And even that protection, which lasted for 70 years, and we only lost it a decade ago. We're up against a much actually deeper, darker problem with this USAID scandal, and as people will see increasingly, the scandals that will break open at the Pentagon and the State Department, which is that we have a Smith-Mundt problem for funding and operations. It's not just propaganda. The blob, our foreign policy establishment, can fund groups that effectively work with prosecutors domestically, or that work at media. Dual use. We give them foreign grants to do media propaganda abroad, but they operate here. Or social media censorship, to coerce foreign countries to pass foreign censorship laws that explicitly and are intended to attack U.S. social media companies and in U.S. peer-to-peer speech. So we need that protection. If we're going to keep this function at all, we need a hard firewall and absolute grotesque penalties for any violation.
So when you're watching all this unfold, one of the things that I've been seeing is that there's been legal action to try to halt some of it. They've been told to destroy any information that they got from certain databases. Like, what's your take on this, and whether any of that is going to hold up?
Oh, 100%. 100. I don't know if it's going to hold up. I think it's going to be a legal dogfight. This is, it's funny because it's sort of a circular dragon eating its own tail, because you're going after the primary soft power projection organ of the blob, because it's been weaponized against Americans. But what is the blob authorized to do? What is USAID authorized to do under statute? Well, something they call judicial reform, which is USAID poaching, funding financially the networks around judges, around courts, around the legal system, around the governance structure of every country on planet Earth. I mean, and Jamie, if you want to just go through a fun exercise right now, you can even put on screen just a simple Google search so people can see just how open source this is. And I can walk through specific damning examples of this. But if you just type in on Google the word USAID and then in a Boolean quotes, judicial reform, and what you're going to see are basically 100 countries that USAID is going after the judges, going after the legal system in order to rig the scales of justice in favor of the foreign policy establishment's interests there. And this has fully come home. And I can go through some examples of this. For example, there's a group called the OCCRP, which you can think of as the Corruption Reporting Project. This is a group that half of its funding comes from USAID and the U.S. State Department. OCCRP the USAID and the State Department have a veto right over the staff that it can hire. This is the largest consortium of investigative journalists on planet Earth. This is the group that broke the Panama Papers. They got all these hacked documents. They got special access to it. I don't have any facts on this. I'm simply noting that it's an oddity that a group funded by a major CIA funding conduit, USAID, while the CIA has the ability to hack, any target around the world that's authorized by the National Security Council. They're getting these special access documents that are reportedly either hacked or leaked, and they're being sponsored by, the group that's connected to something with a hacking power. But I don't know that for a fact. I'm simply noting that for investigative purposes, for oversight bodies who may want to ask questions. But they've won hundreds of awards. Their name has been so pristine for so long. They've been around for almost 20 years, and they were sponsored in order to do investigative hit piece journalism about corruption. And what they do is they go after all of the State Department and USAID and DOD's opponents in the region. So, for example, Jamie, I texted you this beforehand, but if the first thing you want to put on screen are the first two images that I texted you, this is from the USAID.gov website. and I think this will shock people when they see this with the USAID.gov URL right there, and so that you can see how. Yeah, so if you go to the first page that I texted you, and then we'll get to this one.
This is the first thing you sent.
Okay, I'm sorry. The second one then. Yeah. Okay. So here it is. This is USAID's Strengthening Transparency and Accountability Through Investigative Reporting Program. Okay. What you'll see here is you'll see the life of activity. This fund they are still being funded through this grant, and this is for Europe and Eurasia. And you'll see the countries: Eastern Partnership, Armenia, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, and Western Balkans. If you scroll down, you'll see USAID funding is $20 million. $20 million that our taxpayers paid to listen, they don't report on, kittens being saved from falling out of trees. Everything they do is a hit piece about an instance of corruption that can be used by prosecutors in the area to arrest the political opponents of the State Department. And what you'll see here is capacity. Now, this is the phrase everybody has to know. Capacity building is what this is all built under. That means pumping up the blob's assets. Whenever you see the word capacity or capacity building, it means this thing is useful to us. The more money we give it, the more powerful they are to project our influence. And so if you go back to that page, which is page 2 of this USAID, you think, here's what you see. So for $20 million of investment from USAID, here are and this is live on the website. You can find this in the Wayback Machine right now because the USAID website's down. This is USAID, the U.S. government, bragging about the achievements of what they achieved by spending $20 million. At least $4.5 billion in fines levied against targets of these hit pieces. Now, by the way, I should note that the head of the OCCRP was busted in a major documentary that has very little distribution, but I encourage everyone to watch, where he said, because this was I think a year and a half ago or whatnot, but they're up to over $10 billion now.
What's the documentary?
It's on the WikiLeaks X page right now. It's by a group of German journalists who had one-on-one interviews with the head of this group, OCCRP, as well as the USAID grant coordinator and others. And so it's straight from the horse's mouth. And he says in that interview, I believe his name is Drew Sullivan, that it's now over $10 billion. And he brags that is I think he said it was a 20,000% return on investment because all of these dollars were, quote, returned to government coffers. So for $20 million of mercenary media for the state-sponsored hit pieces, the government's got $10 billion back. That's pretty good. That's a 1995 Amazon level return on investment. But now let's get into the darker stuff. 548 policy changes by the government or actions by civil society and the private sector. Now, we don't know if these policy changes are good or bad. Do you think USAID would list them as accomplishments if they were not in furtherance of USAID's or the State Department's foreign policy goals in the region? What they are saying and trying to sort of speak through their teeth, as they say it, is that they proudly sponsored hit piece journalism to ruin people's lives and go after political targets in order to change the policies of foreign governments from the inside. Now, it goes on to say 21 resignations and sackings, including of a president and prime minister. Now, the head of OCCRP in this documentary openly says that their reporting caused, I think it was 5 or 6 different governments to topple and turn over and be transitioned. Proudly. So this is state-sponsored media hit pieces so that prosecutors can arrest presidents and prime ministers to regime change their government and install a more pro-U.S. Political vassal figure in the region. And then the last one is 456 arrests and indictments. And this, again, is listed as a USAID achievement. We don't know what these people did. We don't know, whether they're guilty or innocent or whether or not these were political prosecutions, like you see right now with the New York District Attorney's offices, which is a whole nother USAID-connected can of worms. But These are state-sponsored hit pieces for hire in order to give the justice departments, the prosecutors in a region, the ammunition to arrest the enemies of the state.